welcome to a new tradition at UPEI, which is to be an annual talk from our Vice President Academic on themes and topics of interest to our academic community. And, welcome also to the first day of the 9th month of Jim Randall's time as Vice President Academic. It's remarkable, in fact, Jim, to think that it's been 8 months. It feels like more than that. Notably in the number of things that you've gotten done and that you're getting us to do. You've gotten us to come this afternoon for this inaugural Vice President Academic talk, this one on academic integrity, reflections, and actions. So I'll do the introduction. Jim will give the talk. Barb, as director of the Webster Center, has undertaken to do the moderating of the finishing up. And I think we've got a good and productive and stimulating hour to anticipate. So again, to join me in welcoming Jim Randall for our inaugural
Thank you very much, Wade. And forgive me if I look a little bit like a question mark here. It's not some form of symbolism to the topic at hand, but rather from shoveling snow at the end of the driveway this morning. If we just sort of comment a little bit in terms of this topic and the motivating factors surrounding the selection of this as the topic for this inaugural feature. There are two really motivating factors that stand out to me. The first, in the fall, as all of you are aware, we went through a period here where the value of this university and the value of a university degree from UPEI was being questioned. It forced us, I think, to really question the concept of quality and what constitutes and distinguishes high from low quality. And to me, integrity really is a central component or tenet of any discussion of quality. The second motivating factor occurred in mid-August of 2010, so a month and a half into my term as Vice President Academic, and it was really my first exposure to the media here on the island. I was asked by CBC to respond to an article on the incident of academic dishonesty at Canadian universities. Unfortunately, our registrar was away at the time, and so I had to deal with this without her assistance. And I was asked about, well, what are our experiences at UPEI in terms of incidents of academic dishonesty? And I found out that although the reported number of incidents as measured by the number of files that are in students, or number of letters that are in students' files, are relatively low, there actually is quite a degree of variation across the faculties and schools. And even more so, and obviously I didn't say this as part of my media interview, although it's captured right here now, is the fact that I think I found informally when I started asking around that there was a fair degree of what I would call disquiet, or maybe even a bit of discomfort around the topic. And I would almost even go as far as to say cynicism on the part of some about the process and the reporting of how we deal with sort of academic dishonesty. And it started me thinking once again that this is really sort of a big issue for universities. It's something that we as a university and that all universities should really be addressing and having a sort of a perhaps even an impassioned type of talk about. So let's make sure I've got this right here. Just a few of the topics. You'll see that I almost go back and forth between discussing academic integrity at that high level and talking about some elements that constitute perhaps an absence of academic integrity, that being sort of dishonesty. And hopefully you'll forgive me for going back and forth here. By the end, I hope it'll all sort of make sense. What I'd like to start with in this talk is to set this into the context of some terms and definitions, and I don't want to bore you with a lot of the definitions, but just so that we've got some sense of what we're talking about here. UPEI, if you look at our calendar, if you look at on the website, we actually don't define academic integrity per se. Instead, what we do is we define academic dishonesty. And forgive me for saying this, but we almost define it as sort of the counterpoint, or the opposite, really, of academic integrity. But we define academic dishonesty not really by defining it by stating it as a series of examples. So, for example, plagiarism, cheating, falsifying records. And so I just bring that to your attention to give you some idea of sort of the status, at least at one level, of how we treat or don't treat the concept of academic integrity. One definition of academic integrity, and if you go on sort of the web, you'll see a number of these, comes from the Center for Academic Integrity at Clemson University, actually, and it's as you can see here on the slide, it's a commitment, even in the face of adversity, to 5 fundamental values: honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility. And so you can see here that we're, at least in terms of this definition, we're really talking about that high-level understanding of what this concept actually means. And clearly it's an idealized or ideal definition, and it really doesn't refer to punishment at all. So that's why I say we have to make that distinction between discussions of dishonesty, academic dishonesty, and examples of academic dishonesty, and this broader topic of academic integrity. And if you start looking at a number of websites, and there are a number that are under the University of Alberta website that you can see, and I'll point that out to you now, and I'll point it out later. It actually has an excellent website on aspects of academic integrity and aspects of dishonesty as well. There are a number of terms that come to mind that I think we've all heard, but I don't know how many of us have actually given a lot of thought or attention to the meaning of these terms, or much less whether we've been able to convey those to our students or had discussions on them. So just some of those terms, like concept of common knowledge, or plagiarism, or even cyber plagiarism that you hear in some settings now. And there's also a distinction that's sometimes made between unintentional plagiarism and deliberate plagiarism. So like my topic, it's not easy often to understand these without a lot of time, with a lot of thoughtful reflection. So what are some of the statistics? If I could set this in the context, and this is really the entry point for that CBC interview, really, that they picked up from a paper that was written by a staff member at the University of Guelph in partnership with one of the leading academics in this area in the United States. Some of the statistics on the forms of academic dishonesty in Canada. Now remember here, as I think I've already alluded to, that these are really, or measures of dishonesty are really markers or indicators of the principle of, or better, the lack of academic integrity. And so this study that was undertaken was really on the incidence of forms of academic dishonesty at Canadian University by McCabe and Christensen in 2006. And they surveyed nearly 20,000 students at 10 universities and 1 college in Canada. In this survey, they looked at a number of students, both those going into first year across the entire undergraduate set of programs, as well as graduate students. And so, for example, they found that 73% of first-year students reported committing 1 or more serious acts of academic dishonesty while in high school, and nearly 60% admitted serious acts of cheating on tests in high school. It's also important to look at how students perceive different forms of academic dishonesty. So among undergraduate students, right across these 11 post-secondary institutions, 53% of the undergraduates admitted to serious cheating on written work, and 18% admitted to serious test cheating. And of course, I'm not going to get into the details of what constituted their definition of serious in both of those cases, but I think it's a good indicator. And I think we're all aware that this is self-reported. And I think if we actually looked at this in a different way of examining this, I wouldn't say even any more objective or any less subjective, we might find that these values might even be higher. What I haven't put on this slide here is that they also looked at graduate students and asked them for their attitudes or their incidents of what we would call cheating or serious academic offenses in written work. And they reported that 35% of graduate students surveyed admitted to serious cheating on written work, and 9% admitted to serious test cheating. I won't go into the details, as I said, on the definitions, but this and other surveys in the United States tell us that academic dishonesty is widespread and that we're fooling ourselves when we think that it's not taking place in our campus. One other point in terms of the graduate students, one of the more disquieting points about this is that many of those graduate students are the ones that maybe are TAs or are graders that we rely upon as faculty members to be the direct graders of essays or assignments for undergraduate students. So the next one, why is this important? Why is academic integrity so important? I think that really comes back, to the purpose of higher education. And what I've done here is I've separated out, and this is clearly a very, I'm just generalizing here in terms of the phases or stages of universities, and I apologize in advance for that. But for my purposes, it's convenient to do that for this topic. I've looked at this in terms of sort of almost a traditional period of universities, a modern and what might be referred to as a postmodern era of universities. And a traditional, we have sort of this phrase in loco parentis, or in the place of the parent, where universities were really expected to be shepherding students. They were there in order to, and you, as parents, you sent your sons and daughters away often for the entire year, and you expected that institution, that university, was going to care for them. This wasn't necessarily just to impart disciplinary knowledge. This was a very broad mandate and a very broad role that the institution and the faculty members and the staff were playing. If we look at this in terms of a modern era, I think disciplinary content has become much more critical, significant. Imparting that disciplinary content, making sure that students know and understand what there is being conveyed in a set of disciplines. I think the ideals and the values that I talked about in terms of a traditional university were supposed to be realized indirectly or learned indirectly or even through osmosis. And I think back to my early years of being an assistant professor and especially teaching first-year classes. When I first started, the first classes I went into in the first-year classes, the students, I started by saying that I won't be checking attendance, that I said that I expect all of you to be your big boys and your big girls now, and you can set your own priorities. I look back at that now, and I realize that I was probably wrong in terms of making some of those statements. Because I think I was abdicating, because I was probably thinking it much more in terms of, as a junior faculty member, imparting that disciplinary knowledge, not thinking about it in terms of that broader role I had as a role model or as a mentor for those smiling faces, sometimes not smiling faces in front of me. I now realize that I said that I was really abdicating that responsibility to instill a system of values that's consistent with the beliefs of my university at the time, that was consistent even of professional research and even of the society within which I lived. I think most of us realize that this model, the model that described of a modern university, really doesn't describe the context of many public universities in Canada today. There have been many changes taking place in the roles that universities are expected to play. And I think it's very simplistic as well, even in terms of how we can picture what our student body is. Especially in how it conveys the student body as both as individuals and as a group. Now, as I say, I think we might want to call the era that many universities are in right now to be sort of a postmodern era. In addition to disciplinary content, universities are expected to impart things like critical thinking skills, the importance of civic society, literacy, numeracy, the importance of lifelong learning, or to impart the love of learning, and leadership. So it doesn't take much of a stretch to think of academic integrity as one of this bundle of broader character traits that we're expected to impart to the students that sit in front of us in the classes. In fact, we've even started reaching into the high schools, so we partner with the departments of education and others to recognize that the student doesn't just start their first day here and end 4 years out, but rather there's a continuum that we have to be aware of. And I think we also as part of this postmodern university, need to affirm the shared values, including this sort of commitment to honesty and the pursuit of truth. So, as I said, that's a very generalistic perspective, but I think it describes, at least in terms of my own career, some of the changes I've seen in myself and seen in universities over that 25 years or so that I've been associated with universities in Canada. The next slide, I just want to pick up some. Now I'm going to move back really to plagiarism, this concept of plagiarism. And a number of these points come from that site that I mentioned at the University of Alberta that was quite good, including sort of these categories of reasons for plagiarism. And when they look at plagiarism, they actually divide it into 4 different distinct categories of reasons why students may tend to plagiarize. The first they talk about are the so-called writing and research skills by students. And what they really mean here is that students have not yet learned some of these basic writing and research skills. So, for example, they may not understand how to search the library for sources. They may not know how to evaluate internet sources. So they may not actually have a sense of quality control when they're looking for source material on the internet. They may confuse the terms plagiarism and paraphrasing. And they may even be confused about terminology. There are some that may practice careless note-taking, so that when you take notes in preparing for a paper, you may actually get confused from the point you're taking notes to the point that you're actually writing the final paper. So that's actually a skill that takes time and effort to learn. And in fact, they often might have difficulty and get confused about the style for citing sources. And we actually have responsibility there, because you have a student that might be taking 10 courses spread across several faculties and several disciplines and departments that are very different styles, citation styles. And you can imagine how that might confuse students. Once again, in my days, if I could call on my own experience as an undergraduate student, it wasn't really until, and I'll admit this here, it wasn't really until the 2nd or 3rd year of my undergraduate education that I really started to understand how research was carried out and what it really meant to synthesize the work of others into some coherent whole with a willingness and the ability to comment on this synthesis. So I can understand the difficulty that students are really facing as they're going through this evolution in their knowledge, and not just in their knowledge, but their way of examining knowledge. A second category of reasons why students plagiarize that's provided out of the University of Alberta are misunderstandings regarding key concepts. So they may not understand what plagiarism actually means, or common knowledge, or public domain. Or they may have the perception that online information is public knowledge just because it's accessible to everyone. A note, by the way, this is not just for students. I think there may be some of us as faculty members that have perhaps a lack of understanding of some of these terms as well, and we may convey inaccurate or misleading information to students. A third set of factors that they use to try to explain why plagiarism exists is in terms of this set of external factors. And this can come everywhere from pressure from family, and competition for scholarships or jobs. And what this really speaks to, in part, is that the means justify the ends, where the ends may be defined very differently between ourselves and by students. And what it really suggests as well is that in some cases, learning in the minds of some of our students may not necessarily be the point of an education, but the point, and once again I'm generalizing here, but the point may be to get a piece of paper that qualifies you for a job. So when the grade becomes the goal, then behavior that you and I might view as unethical may become ethical to them. And learning and the evaluation of learning are sometimes also considered one rather than two distinct processes. We sometimes hear about the concept of the commodification of knowledge and education. And that's also a part of one of the factors that's within this bundle as well, where some students might view education as a commodity, where learning is solely done so that the career aspirations can be fulfilled. And I think there's always an element to this, so we can't necessarily view this as a completely wrong thing to do. In fact, we often are trying to link the two as a mechanism to show students that there's a career after many non-professional degree completions. A fourth bundle of factor, or what I would call internal and what they would call internal factors, and I've just given a couple of examples here of poor time management and organizational skills. And the fifth is actually what I would actually think as other external factors. And these are sort of external contextual factors like the cultural factors. The example they give at the University of Alberta is that many non-Western cultures view copying someone else's work as a form of flattery. And the idea that words can be owned is sometimes viewed as a more westernized type of concept. Finally, I think we need to look at the broader societal context within which our educational system exists. And this may also be part of that external external factors category. I think we all have to, we look at the daily news and we see examples, for example, of integrity or lack of integrity in corporate behavior, questions regarding the link between clinical researchers and private companies, where we start questioning ourselves, and it's no wonder that our students start questioning where the ends justifying the means is reinforced in the minds of many of the students that sit in our classes. So why are we reluctant as an academy, and why are we reluctant as individuals to perhaps report dishonesty and report plagiarism? I think several surveys, especially in the United States, of faculty in the US and in Canada, show that a large percentage of faculty admitted to either ignoring incidents of suspected academic dishonesty. And there's a 2005 article by McCabe that speaks to this as well. There was also a study of 9 campuses done at Rutgers University of 800 professors that found that 54% of them seldom reported cheating, 40% had never reported cheating that they encountered, and only 6% had often reported cheating that they encountered. And there are a number of reasons that have been given here, and you can probably think of some yourselves of why that has taken place. For example, there's a perception out there that the process of the review is often tedious, is time-consuming, and is often not supportive of faculty members. There's also a suggestion sometimes that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. So, for example, there may be the same punishment meted out, regardless of the severity of the action. There are some faculty, I believe, who feel that by reporting this and seeing this through to conclusion, you might damage the student's reputation or career aspirations, and they'd rather confront the student informally themselves. And that's fine in some cases, and in fact, we've encouraged that as part of our own regulations. But this actually leads to faculty thinking of this as a one-time offense, as opposed to looking at this as a record both of the student, but a record of the institution as a whole. Another one is that it's often perceived that examples of academic dishonesty are very difficult to prove and prove right through that system. Some universities will find that across the faculties, across the schools, and even across departments, they have a very different set of policies. So it's inconsistent in terms of how they deal with plagiarism. And that often leads to confusion amongst some faculty. And finally, faculty are often unaware, perhaps, of the root causes and mechanisms to prevent dishonesty, or they don't believe that it's their role to educate students on these issues. And it gets back to that point of perhaps the nature of a modern university versus a postmodern university. So let's look at this in terms of 3 groups of actors, if you want to call them that, at a university. And it could be this university, it could be any university. And the first are what I would call sort of faculty responsibilities. And what I'd like to do is sort of there was an article written by Karen Close where she and others have talked about this as well, that there's no quick fix, if you want to call it that, about addressing issues of academic dishonesty and instilling these principles, this principle of academic integrity. I think we all are aware as faculty that we have a role to play in becoming better educated on the subject. And hopefully talks like this and dialogues within the campus will help to do that. But research shows that one of the factors that encourages plagiarism is when students believe that their instructors are indifferent to it. So if we actually convey or project that indifference, it's understandable that there will be a culture of acceptance of dishonesty within an institution. The other thing is, in terms of responsibility as faculty members, is that we have to hold ourselves to the same standard we expect of our students. We have to design, model, and clarify expectations and the rules regarding collaboration. So, for example, it's been shown that faculty and students have sometimes have a very different conception of the value of individual versus collaborative work. And they find it very difficult to understand, students in this case find it difficult to understand why sharing information or ideas is inappropriate in some circumstances. We have to continually revise our forms of assessment. And it almost seems natural to us as faculty members that we don't use the same form of assessment, in fact, even the same test, year after year. But we have to make sure that we are very much aware of what we're doing and keep our own integrity, make sure we're aware that we have a commitment to make to integrity here as well. And this partly is in keeping with reducing the opportunities or the temptations for students to engage in forms of academic dishonesty. And when I think of this, I think of that kid in the candy shop. If we're not aware of the temptations we're placing in front of students, we shouldn't be surprised, in fact, when some students are prone to exhibit forms of academic dishonesty. So this also means that we don't ignore examples of dishonesty when you see it. And this is part of getting back to teaching those core values. Ignoring it, as I've already alluded to above, sends the message that it is acceptable. It also cheapens the value of the work being done legitimately by others and reduces the faith that students place in the values and the virtues of the institution. And I've got a quote here by Mackenzie in the late 1990s, where she says, it's reckless and irresponsible to assign research projects that are ill-defined and vague. And she uses the phrase, the go find out about it types of papers that invite those types of papers that are submitted from paper mills, for example. I almost said puppy mills, but they're quite different, by the way. On the surface, I think, it encourages students to go to these paper mills, but more fundamentally, it places little thought or value on the exploration of original thought, on questioning, and on synthesis. So if we look at the responsibilities of students here as well, they also have to take responsibility. And there's some interesting work that's emerging in the United States, especially on students and the role of students in academic integrity. There are many who believe that students actually should take a primary role or responsibility for academic integrity. And I'll talk about this in just a moment. There's this movement for the development of not just honor codes, but sort of modified honor codes, where in fact students do have primary responsibility for monitoring and assessing incidents of academic dishonesty. And what this points to is that it's not a top-down process by any means, where it's student-driven and where we actually as institutions and as faculty members have to be willing to give up some of the control that we have over that process. As students, I think it's important for us and for you to educate yourselves on terms and definitions, and also to not ignore unethical behavior in others. That means talking to the students themselves, and perhaps even more sort of threatening to students to talk to instructors or colleagues. And finally, let me just bring up the university responsibilities. Now, I think we at UPEI and other universities are already doing a lot in this area. So, for example, the library on the Moodle page, there's already a quiz and a tutorial on what constitutes plagiarism. I know the Webster Center already does a lot of things. And in fact, I know when I was doing my preparation for the interview in mid-August that there are a lot of faculty and departmental specific types of exercises and introductions to concepts of what constitutes academic dishonesty and, to a lesser extent, integrity. But I believe that our university and all universities have other responsibilities to play as well. I think it's responsible for us to streamline the process as much as possible and make it consistent and clear for faculty and for students. I think we have a responsibility as a university to educate ourselves and to others on what integrity means and what dishonesty is in its many forms. And that means not being passive about it by just mentioning it in course syllabi, but rather being engaged with students about what this means. It also means not being solely punitive when you talk about academic dishonesty or integrity. I think we also have a responsibility as a university to recognize and affirm integrity as a core institutional value. And finally, I think we as faculty, students, and administration have a shared responsibility. And that is an interest in academic integrity, where the nature of the growth of knowledge means that we're building on the work and ideas of others. It's important for me as a faculty member to convey this, and a researcher as it is for students to understand this as well. If I could just give you sort of some concluding remarks here. First of all, as I've alluded to, there are a number of resources here that you can go to. It doesn't take very much searching to find out. There's a lot that's been written on this. I made reference to the Center for Academic Integrity at Clemson. I also made reference to our own Moodle platform as well. There are a number of universities that are like UPEI that have tutorials on academic integrity. York's is one that I found very quickly. I've made reference to the University of Alberta's webpage on this. One of the most quoted articles was that written by Bill Taylor, an emeritus professor of political science from Oakton Community College in Des Plaines, Illinois, entitled Academic Integrity, a Letter to My Students. And it's an open letter, and he's given permission to repeat that and copy that wherever we want to. And I'll see if I can put that on a site for you to look at as well. It's an interesting article because it's a short 4 or 5 page article that talks about not just student responsibility, but his responsibility as a faculty member to his students at every stage in the creation of that class and the completion of the class. Another one that you should be aware of is an article by Pavella and McCabe called 10 Updated Principles of Academic Integrity, How Faculty Can Foster Student Honesty, in the 2004 issue of the Change Journal. Just my final message here. This fall, in this very room, as a matter of fact, our president used the phrase raised expectations. To me, raised expectations has a personal meaning. It means how can I do my job to the best of my ability, and how can I make a difference in the lives of those around me? Raising expectations is not just about getting the next paper published. It's not about getting the next grant. It's not even about increasing our enrollments, although all of these things are important. To me, fostering the growth of a culture of academic integrity is one of the key tenets of raising expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randall. We'll open it up to questions, comments, thoughts, that maybe we can start a discussion about this really important notion that I think affects everybody at UPEI, students, faculty, staff, and those of us who have been involved. Not so much from grading academic dishonesty, but having students in our class when we've been exposed to this. So, any questions or thoughts?
And I'm hoping that we might get some dialogue going within the audience, not because I'm afraid of responding, but it's I'd love to see this discussion taking place amongst you in the audience. Just don't throw things at each other. That's an element of integrity as well, by the way.
Okay.
I have a question. We've been growing significantly over the last 10 years, say. So that's undergraduate, graduate, as well as international. And we talk about certain areas that we know about from research that's been done in the area. So if we were doing due diligence, what would that look like? For example, you talk about cultural variation in terms of what that might mean from a dishonesty perspective. So are we passively sort of walking into that and then dealing with students as they fall into not understanding that is a problem for them? Or are we out ahead of that and making students more aware and doing orientations that can assist them? And if we're not, we need to be doing work in that area and so on. So Jim, do you have any?
I think you're pointing to something. Clearly, a lot of the comments I'm making here are at a sort of a system-wide perspective, and it's almost theoretical as much applied to this university. I don't know because I don't sit in the classes. I'm not there in sort of down in the trenches where decisions have to be made. And so I'm just getting my impressions of maybe what is or is not happening. And so I'd have to rely upon my colleagues here. I just don't think we have a base of knowledge yet that I'm aware of that allows us to be much more comfortable in knowing whether this is a significant problem. But based upon the statistics I'm hearing about, I believe that it's a problem. And the fact that I don't think we've actually engaged in that discussion beyond dealing with it on a case-by-case example up to this point.
No.
Dr. Randall, thank you for presenting this. And actually, when you discuss the forces that may be influencing the students or leading the students to engage in this kind of activity, when you look at it, I thought one aspect that we have seen over the years, increasing workload for the students for various reasons has become a very important reason. If you really look at the students' welfare from a very compassionate point of view, because of various social, economic, and even academic, even about reasons relating to standards themselves or the levels of competition within the academy, and students have a lot of difficulties with dealing with the level of workload. Taking 6 courses and every professor prescribing large amount of work and without knowing what the other course might involve will put the students into a very difficult situation. And I think I'm not sure whether we as an institution are focusing on that aspect of the student life. Very recently, when you look at among the doctors, when they came to know that the x-rays that are prescribed by the different doctors without the others' knowledge have slightly increased their, impact to cause cancer among the, patients. Now there are, practices developed to make sure that there's a, combined, effort to, look at the issue. I think, given the times that we are in, that type of look at the issue is also very important. I just voiced this, as I mentioned to you, it comes from a very compassionate point of view on the student welfare.
And if I could just comment on that, it might be interesting to get comments from our colleagues in some of the professional schools where there's in some cases, a more cohort-based approach to a curriculum than in sort of the arts or science especially, where especially before you've chosen a major, there's a less of a sense of that community. And it'd be interesting to know whether that development of sense of community, both within the classroom and outside of the classroom, has any impact upon your ability, both as faculty, as administrators, or even as students, to instill that sense of academic integrity.
I could speak from the nursing faculty and Kim as well. In the professional program of nursing, we have, I have participated in, for lack of a better word, catching students cheating. And it's a real problem for me as a nurse, because I explain to the students, if you're a nurse looking after someone and it's 3:30 and your shift is over and somebody's asked for morphine and you go, it's going to put me back like 15, 20 minutes, whatever. If you would cheat at a stupid academic paper or in an exam, why would you not cheat at something like drugs or anything like that? So to me, it's a real issue in nursing, I can't speak further, for students who are caught cheating. And as a faculty member, it's very difficult. But I think we're talking about, in our situation, the college, life and death scenarios. If you're cheating in a history program, you'll probably cheat in the bank or something like that, but you're not going to have an effect on, people's lives or your clients.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think the faculty view this as very unethical behavior. But Jim's point about the students looking at this as an end to a means, and they see a job at the end of it. And so in their minds, they want to be successful. They want the job and will do whatever it takes to get that job. And that's what their viewpoint is. And it's interesting about the cohorts because it's not until a student in nursing, at least it's been our experience, is actually identified as having been caught in an unethical situation, that other students will come forward and say, yeah, we know that's been happening for years. There's this sense that they need to protect one another, and I find that a bit disturbing as well.
Wait.
I get to have a unique perspective on this because the president is the only one in the university who gets to expel students. We reached that point at the end of what we call the 3-strike rule. So the first time the student gets a pretty stiff warning and a no grade on the work. The second time they get a suspension for a semester or more, plus Fs and so on their paper transcript. And then the third time there's a recommendation that comes forward, eventually from a dean to me, that the student should be expelled. And I don't think there's ever been one of those events where there wasn't some great song and dance about extenuating circumstances or personal difficulties or wouldn't do it again or whatever. And it's how I pick up on what I've heard Barb and Kim say. I sit there, not to disagree with your point about compassion, but I sit there as sanguine as I am about anything I ever do in the university and go through with the expulsion, because as far as I'm concerned, they're being expelled for stupidity. If you could read the actual evidence of what constitutes the plagiarism or cheating or whatever it is, you can hardly believe that anyone could get to university that would be stupid enough to do that, yet let alone do it 3 times or perhaps more. So I don't say that to be glib about it whatsoever, but in a sense I think there is that cheating is almost a mirror image or an alter ego of a lack of intellectual sophistication or willingness to work or ability to discern right from wrong. It's all variations on the same thing. And in fact, I wonder, and this is where it may come back to a question, Jim, I wonder if it picks up on your point, Kathy, whether people are coming from another culture or they're coming from high school, which in a sense is another culture, the biggest jump is critical thinking. The ability to make an argument, to take evidence and weigh it and not just jump to one side or the other. And I think that in our society we have an issue of whether it's young people or older people, and I think a lot of the times in the university, what people think is an argument is closer to a one-sided fight. Just I want to tell you this, and you better go along with it. And that to me is one of the biggest jobs of a university, is to practice and model, as you said, Jim, and to exemplify that discernment and ability to deal with issues and argue fairly.
Well, I'd ask those in the nursing program, and you'd be tested with some of your experiences there. Do you talk to the students at any time about, preemptively, about academic integrity, what it means, what the consequences are, et cetera? Or do you do this kind of after the fact and then develop that conversation?
No, we do it repeatedly. We talk about what academic integrity is, what professional integrity, what ethics is, not only in their schoolwork, but also not only in their professional lives, but in their schoolwork. So we do that all the time, and we do it repeatedly. It's in every course they know what academic honesty is.
As well in global issues. Mandatory first year course for every student who comes to UPEI. Nursing students are included in that, have to take global issues, and that's the very first. I taught it a couple of years ago, so we all talked about that at the very beginning. But that it's like, I don't think they understand. It's like the unintentional plagiarism, and I mean, some of them honestly plagiarize unintentionally, and that's, I don't know how to
I think it reminds me of the debates about nature versus nurture in some of these as well. At what point are some of these personality traits instilled in people on the basis of whether it's birth or the early upbringing, and what responsibility and what role do we have to play, and what success can we expect in the period of time that we have them here? And I'm sure there are many people that have discussed that concept, better people than myself here, in terms of that the ability or the role that we have to play. But in the research that I've seen recently in preparing for this paper, there are a number of universities that have put in place sort of a culture of integrity and placed that in terms of the day-to-day operations as well as the value systems of the university. And it's worked. It's worked in terms of the percentage of students that cheat or on various things relationship to those that don't have that. And this is the part of that modified honor codes, etc. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical about the research because you never know whether students have self-selected in going to those universities, and therefore they may have a set of value systems that they're predisposed going to those places that have a reputation as having a high degree of integrity. But at the same time, I think there is value in actually looking at what role that institutional culture plays in changing the nature of the value systems of students. And if I could just get back to the point you made, Wade, in terms of critical thinking, I do see the link there. And once again, we can't change everything in a week or in 9 months or in 5 years or in a lifetime. But it may be useful to think of, well, in what way do we actually instill those learning outcomes, critical thinking, literacy, numeracy, in what way they are embedded in every major that we have. I remember a time when, and I was an undergraduate student, and even when I was a teacher, where as long as you took one course from each one of the social sciences, humanities, life sciences, etc., you were considered to have been exposed to that broad area as part of your distributional elective requirements. There are many universities across Canada and the United States that have shifted that model to one where, rather than having an exposure to those broad disciplinary areas, where you're expected within every major to have some evidence of having acquired or been exposed to critical thinking, literacy, numeracy. And in some majors, they already have that embodied within their major. In others, it forces them to be very introspective and take a look at that and say, well, is it, if for example, if one of the elements of that is a love of lifelong learning, how do we actually do that within our major? What do we have to change in terms of the major to do that? And it may require changing a major. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we do that, but it's an item for discussion at all universities that examine that portion of the major outside of that portion of the degree outside of the major, that portion of the degree outside of the content that students are expected to have to qualify as a graduate in that field.
I just have a question and a comment. I teach first-year students in University 100, so we actually spend, time quite specifically on these issues. And it's always interesting to me because I reference McCabe's work and they read it, and about the whole issue of honor codes, and they're almost exclusively dismissive of that. And I know sometimes it's difficult in a classroom setting to discuss issues of, who's cheating and who's not. I reassure them I'm not taking names or anything, but in trying to have some sort of intellectual discussion about it, they're quite dismissive of the notion of imposing an honor code. and they sort of think that, well, people are either honest or they're not. That's what they're expressing publicly. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that it needs to be part of the discussion, you know, and most students, when I just asked a quick show of hands, you know, has this been discussed in other places? And most of them, and maybe they weren't there that day or whatever, say that it's not, you know, that it's not, and they're not familiar with Academic Regulation 20, which, you know, there was a surprise that the fellow can get expelled from the university. Now, and I'm curious, Wade, because somebody always asks, does that happen very often? And I'll be honest, you know, as a faculty member, I don't have any information about that. Like, I don't have, now, I haven't been around forever, but I don't have a great sense of what the context is. How many have you expelled, Wade?
3 or 4. 3 or 4 in 12 years.
In 12 years.
So the number is not that great. The numbers mount as you get into suspensions, for example.
Yeah. But even share, and I guess the other little comment, like having some sort of, like when you, and I've faced it, I've talked with students that I've, you know, suspected, and a number of times, more times, it's what I would call unintentional. You know, they're not, their skills, and this is in paper writing, not test taking, their skills are not well developed, and they haven't accepted the responsibility for that. And it takes time to work through that with students, and you know, something that the university might consider just as support services to faculty is somewhere where you can refer a student. You know, that if this is an issue, you've confronted, and I'm going to refer you over here, you know, for these various services.
Thanks. Please welcome, and then Joy.
Hi, thanks for this discussion. Academic integrity and the high expectations, wonderful. And then I'm thinking about the roles of faculty and staff and students. But, you know, as a takeaway for me, I'm still kind of confused as to who you are seeing as primarily responsible for this. Or is that still a work in progress?
Well, hopefully the message I'm giving is that I almost think of it as that Venn diagram. You can picture in my mind in that there are responsibilities for students. I don't think there are any students here. Maybe that's telling. We didn't market this to students. But there are the responsibilities that are for students alone, the responsibilities for faculty, and the responsibilities as an institution. That although I have responsibility, and the deans have responsibility, and the president has responsibility, and the registrar has responsibility, it's really that's sort of a collective responsibility of us as a community. But so each of us has our own, what I would say, mutually exclusive responsibilities, but there are some that we share as well. And so I think, although I haven't left this in terms of, although the title was Reflections and Actions with a set of action statements, I think what I'm alluding to here is that we as a university, and I personally, have to take this more seriously and bring it sort of up a level in terms of the way we're treating this. And this could be as simple as making sure that the sources that are available both to faculty and students are much more transparent. That's one very immediate thing we can do to make sure that we're at least exposed or have the potential to be exposed to more knowledge on the subject.
Yeah, a topic this important to my mind is being fragmented, the information that goes to students. You know, there's no strict rule as to this is necessary and compulsory. So speaking from the aspect of international students as a whole, we have a group that takes time to understand what is going on, and they need to be told specifically what the university stands for and the rules and the consequences. Because if they don't understand, and as he said, plagiarism is viewed differently culturally and things like that, but it is time the university stood firm and told every new student what the institution stands for and what the consequences are if you plagiarize and what plagiarism really is. Because as it is, people interpret it differently. But yeah, I think we have to put something in place that shows everybody what it is. And we do a little bit during the orientation, but that's a short period to tell somebody who is battling with residence and registration of courses, plagiarism. Even plagiarism, they don't understand what it is, you know, so.
Can I make a short comment? Yeah, sure. You're right, it is a culture. And so therefore, I think that the values have to be agreed on and clear and transmitted. And the other is that there is a regulation that applies to researchers, faculty, the integrity and research and scholarship. And I'm always surprised, I'm not surprised because it's very difficult to find the policy if you look for it. But there's a lot of people that don't know that that even exists. And so the culture has to be built within the whole community, not just imposed on the students. It has to be built and modeled by everyone.
And if I could just briefly comment on that, when I first started thinking about this paper, it was going to encompass that as well, but I realized they couldn't do that in the time I had. But I sort of alluded to that when I talked about the fact that in what we do on our everyday professional lives as instructors and as researchers, we have to model that behavior because we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our society and our professional disciplines.
So Jim had mentioned that he didn't finish the end of this paper with an action, but I think absolutely we have a great action that's come out of today. You're taking lead on what lots of us suffer with all the time, because every time I teach a course, I have questions, and you need to have support when you're faced with these situations. And of course, we're student-centered. Students come first at UPEI, so we want to feel the compassion that someone raised for the students, but we also want every student to graduate with a degree from UPEI that has a high standard. And I think we should thank you for taking the time to prepare this and to be more transparent about what we face every day. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.